Hi everyone, and welcome to this video about South Park, Bigger, Longer and Uncut. On this channel I've already talked about Family Guy and a lot about The Simpsons, so I thought, why not take a look at the other part of what I call the Power Trio. Now, the reason I chose to talk about the movie instead of any individual season or episode is that, as the title suggests, I truly view this as the quintessential South Park experience. I also think that it is the most important thing to ever come out of South Park. The fact that it did so well and made $83 million at the box office basically saved the show. It came out right in the middle of season 3, at which point creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker even admitted in interviews that they felt the show was coming to an end. That kind of feeling from the creators really did show too, as they really put their all into making this film the best that it could be. If you want to find them, there are loads of interesting interviews out there documenting the trials and tribulations that went into making this film. Let's just say that I'm glad that they stood their ground with all of their creative decisions, such as making this a musical and having it be as edgy as it actually was. So let's get on to reviewing the damn thing already. For a start, I like the intro scene with Stan and the entire town singing the song. It deliberately has the exact opposite tone that will be seen in the rest of the movie, and believe me, once we actually get into the meat of the plot, that is made very clear. I like how things start off on a simple note of the four boys watching a movie that just happens to have some bad language. Some of the lines in the theatre are great, like, well, what do you expect, they're Canadian. That's just a classic line. From there, we have Kenny dying a gruesome death after copying a scene from the movie, and you guessed it, Kyle's mum leads the town to try and get Terrence and Phillip cancelled. She truly is a you know what. I think this dynamic is the best aspect of the whole movie because it manages to make a good satirical point about free speech and even touches on some people's parenting style. That whole TV interview exchange with the whole "Can I finish?" with Sheila and a Canadian minister of movies is truly a classic scene. And who can forget the Oscar nominated song Blame Canada? This is not only great lyrically, it also demonstrates in a clear way how these big moral crusaders are often just as smug and intolerant as whoever they are protesting against. And that whole dynamic is perfectly showcased in the last few lines of the song. The whole angle that people get that mad at movies and TV shows because they think they can have that big an impact on someone's life, that sentiment is still very much around today. And this movie quite rightly puts that argument to shame, because if there are serious things that someone does, the problems are usually deep-rooted and usually lie closer to home. But of course people don't want to take any kind of responsibility for these things, and will quite happily blame the first thing that they see. As we move on from there, things are just generally paced very well, as we are slowly introduced to more of the main conflicts as we go. I did like the whole Saddam Hussein and Satan relationship that they had going on. It is just typical over-the-top South Park. I think crude scenes like this are unique to the first 3 or 4 seasons of the show too, so it is nice to showcase them in this movie. I was even happy with the ending of the plot as well. I think it all resolved in a believable way, and the whole climax was filled with some great animation. And of course, who could forget Kenny? He had a big part to play in the end of this film, and it was great to see. The way in which he decides to sacrifice himself for the greater good is such a noble thing to do, and they do well by building on that moment and allowing us to see his face for the first time. That scene, along with the words that he says to his friends, really ends up being quite the heartwarming moment, to be fair, which is a very rare thing indeed for this film. In terms of the other characters, Stan and Kyle both had their moments with their mum and girlfriend respectively, but they never really had any individual character stuff to go through. It was more just how they related to other people. Cartman was his usual scheming self, of course, and indeed it is the V-chip which had been in play all story which comes back into full focus in the end. Eric Cartman literally saves the day by swearing. What a nice bit of irony that is. I also love how Barbara Streisand is considered as the most offensive swear word of all. So yeah, all in all I found the plot to be well focused throughout, and that's quite impressive given that this ran for over 18 minutes, instead of the usual 22 minutes that an episode goes for. In terms of the musical side of things, they pulled it off really well, and that is coming from someone who is not typically a big fan of musicals. I don't dislike any of the songs. The only one that is kind of meh for me is the Saddam I Can Change one. But Blame Canada, Up There, What Would Brian Bottano Do, La Resistance, they're just all great. The latter might actually be my favourite one of them all. I just love how they blend all of the movie's songs into one powerful finish. Suffice to say that I thought that the songs ended up being a positive to the film rather than a negative. At the end of the day though, being a comedy show, the nuts and bolts of South Park is the comedy. And indeed, this movie is very funny. I'm not going to go through all of the gags because that would just take the shine off them. But rest assured, with moments such as these,
how would you like to go see the school counselor?
How would you like to suck my balls?
What did you say?
I'm sorry. Actually, what I said was, how would you like to suck my balls, Mr. Garrison?
if you like South Park's vulgar, over-the-top type of comedy, you'll feel right at home here. So to round up my thoughts on this movie, it was just a great adaptation of the show. Now, the reason I called it the quintessential South Park experience is that you have the same characters from the show, and the way that they act, and the way that the comedy flows, along with the crudeness of it all will all feel very familiar to fans of the show. To go along with all of those basic fundamentals of the show, you also had other things like the great animation that I already touched on. You had a great satirical breakdown of offensive movies and people's reaction to them. And of course you had profanity all over the place. Literally, I'm surprised it was even possible to cram this much profanity into a film and still have a semblance of a plot. Not to mention the great voice acting throughout. Matt and Trey, as always, do a fine job, and I think the late Mary Kay Bergman deserves a special mention here too, for voicing basically all of the female characters. She really did a great job, and the film was certainly much better off for it. All in all, basically everything I would want from a South Park movie, this not only had, it had it in abundance. For that reason, despite the fact that the show is still going on to this day, this will remain the perfect South Park experience.